And what I want to cover today is I'm going to touch briefly on building an effective service catalogue, more from the angle of how we can use our CMDB to help us build that service catalogue and make the most out of it. We're then going to focus on simplifying the approach to either building a CMDB from scratch, making your CMDB more mature, or to get the most out of it, and how we can then use that across the different areas of our business to drive change, or to drive things like proactive problem management, automation, giving a better user experience to our customers, and how the CMDB is actually quite vital to do many of those things. And then finally, we're going to touch on how we can use AI to do some of that heavy lifting for us. So one of the challenges of building an effective CMDB quickly is getting access to the right data, but also trying to understand what problems are we trying to solve. And we can use AI to do a lot of that. So rather than having to take months to build our CMDB and to understand what's going on, we can use AI to do that within days. So it's making the most of that type of technology and how that can help us moving forward. So if we start, we're talking about building an effective service catalogue. And there's some core design principles to building a service catalogue. So first of all, you want it to be consolidated. You really want one place where your end users go. You want to be clearly defined. You want one entry point for something that I want. You don't want 5 different things to get to the same end goal. It should be really easy for that end user to use. You want to make sure that everything's in one place. We should automate where we can. So to drive service catalogue adoption, you have to give the end user something back. Why would I go there rather than ringing the help desk? The key there is around to automate. If I can go to the portal and get what I want immediately, because something goes and does it for me, then I'm going to do it. Because I'm not going to ring up if I have to wait for the transaction, because the ticket's going to get assigned to another agent to deal with it. If I go to the portal, I request access to something, and I get it immediately, then I'm going to go and use it. That's one way of driving up that adoption. It's quite key to identify those automation candidates from the point of design. You then have to simplify it. So we want things written in end-user language. In IT, we think we're really good at explaining things to end users, but predominantly we're not. So we have to understand the language that an end user wants to use. So we need to look at how they're requesting things, and how are they communicating with us. What are they putting inside the chat channel and inside the portal? And then take that language and put it back into our service catalogue. So next time they go there, they can see that the way that they described it previously has now been answered. When they put that into the search box next time round, they get what they want. We also need to transform it. So we need to make sure we haven't got approval for approval's sake. We're not slowing things down when there's no regulatory or need for us to do so. You need the right level of approval, because some things need approval, some things have a cost associated with them. Some things have a reason why we need to control that access, and therefore you need to have that approval step. But don't over-approve, don't have steps in that aren't needed in the process. Look at why it's there, challenge why it's there, and then you only have the right steps in the process. It's all about getting that end user what they need as quickly as they can. And then it's all about usage. So I want a clean, simple user experience. I want to go and find things when I need them. I don't want to clutter. I want things that are specific to my job role and what I do. And then the key of automation, everything I can do where I can get it immediately. Password reset's like an easy one, but access to shared folders, access to software, faults on my machine that have already been triaged, so it tells me I've got an issue and all I've got to do is accept the fix. Things like that, they really make a massive difference to end user adoption. And ultimately, if you want to try and encourage people to use the portal because of all the benefits that it gives, you've got to give that element back. And another key one is mobility. I don't want to be having to be at my desk, at my laptop to go and do something. I'm on my phone, I want to request something, I'm walking to a meeting, I'll just go and do it then. I've got an approval to do, or I've got a new joiner to process. Actually, I've just remembered that I've got a report I want to send out tonight, so I'm going to go and set that up now. I don't want to wait until I've got back, I need to do it immediately. We've got some real world examples of a customer where we helped revise their service catalogue, and the key here was to get the average service delivery time down. It was 1 hour 42 minutes to 15 minutes in terms of an average response SLA and fixed SLA. So the customers got what they wanted within a quarter of an hour. That then drove up their adoption massively to the portal because people started to see the benefit of it. By taking those steps out and pushing that automation in, we took 6 years of effort within 1 year's request cycle, just because we automated everything that we could. And then we saved just under 5 resources annually, which they could then use to drive up DevOps in this particular organisation. That's where they want to focus on. They were trying to get less support usage for support and more to leverage those skills to improve the products that they were selling. So that was their angle. But it was all done by just applying some really simple process steps and some thought patterns around how to build that service catalogue. And clearly, because this is a presentation about CMDB, it's all about how that catalogue is visible and how you are exposing the things that you do. So your CMDB is vital because it will understand everything that you do as a business. That's what it should be doing. So we'll talk about how you might have logical and physical CIs within your business, but you've also got the cost of provisioning those CIs. You've also got how are they consumed. You've also got what are the business processes that they support. And the CMDB should be able to tell you all of that. And the reason that's so important, because if you understand the business processes that you provide, then you can drive your catalogue items to support those end users. Because they don't care what it runs on, they just care about what it is they're trying to do. The business process and the action that they're trying to take. And that should be part of your wider CMDB and your understanding of how you provision those services to those end users. And in this picture, this diagram of visibility, you've got your channels at the top. It doesn't really matter how they're getting there. They should be presented the same options every single time, based on what they do and how they want to consume it. And then whether it's dealt with through self-service, through automation, or through your back-end delivery function, it's one function of quality output back to those end user channels. And then where I can have a service integration layer on that side there, left-hand side, right-hand side as you're looking, in order to then go and deliver those services straight away. And that feeds into DevOps, better control of risk, better management of those channels, proactive problem management, which is really key. So if you take things away before they happen, that's the best user experience you can provide. And if you have a CMDB that understands how things are plugged together, you've got the best opportunity to do more proactive problem management. Because when an event comes in or an alert happens, you can then process that, resolve the issue, and then nobody even knows it ever happened, which is ultimately where you want to try and get to. And then feeding into automation, and obviously the CMDB in the bottom corner, which underpins everything that we're going to talk about today. On the left-hand side, there's some things which I'm not going to drill into now, but things like self-healing, so self-solving problems, better knowledge management, driving your end automation, so from the end user sees as opposed to your back-end automation. And then what we've just touched on now, which is the overarching extract of catalogue management and what that looks like. It's about making sure that it's evergreen. You're providing that lens onto your environment. And for some organisations, where they're moving away, they're taking this bit here and they're merging it into one tribe. So rather than having assignment groups in traditional ITSM, we're dealing with more organisations now that are using that as a tribe. So I have the skills, I then swarm groups together when issues come in. I don't look at segregating tickets into individual locations. I'm just going to look at the resources that I've got and pull the right people in when I need them. And as organisations pivot to that style of delivery, understanding what you have and what the issue is even more important, because you can't pull together an effective swarm unless you understand the touch points that that business process has. So if I had an issue here today, and you were all the people, all the resources that I had, for me to effectively triage that, I need to know what all your skills are, so I can pull 3 or 4 people together to solve that problem as quickly as possible. And the only way I can do that is if A, I understand the problem, B, I understand what touch point it hits, and then I understand the skills of the people that I've got. And that should all be contained and held within your CMDB as a central repository. So, how can we simplify the approach to delivering a CMDB? So, we try to bring everything down into 12-week plans. It should never be longer than that. Because if you go any longer than that, you lose focus, things start to drift, you're not really effectively controlling your organisation. Now, there's an argument that 12 weeks is too long in an agile sprint world. So there will be people that say, no, 4-week sprints, that's the max we go to. So okay, we'll break it into 3-4-week sprints. But realistically, there's always some complexity and there's always an amount you have to deliver in order to make something palatable to either the end user or the person that's funding the project. So 12 weeks is a realistic estimate to provide a CMDB that's covering some of what I just spoke about. So an understanding of your physical, your logical, understanding where you might be able to automate, understanding where you might be able to leverage some proactive problem management. I think 12 weeks is an acceptable time period. So first of all, you want to understand what you've got. So you may have a CMDB already, you may be on the maturity curve in terms of where you are. So maybe you understand all of your physical assets, but you haven't quite got to the logical end yet. Or maybe you've actually done that. You can map your business services, you can map your CIs, but you haven't got to business process level. Or maybe you don't really understand how your applications are costed. So you understand what you've got, you don't really know how much you pay for them. So if you're trying to migrate to the cloud, you can't just go to your CMDB and tell me, what do I pay now? What will I pay when I move to the cloud? It's quite a difficult thing to do. Not many organisations have got to that level of maturity yet, but that's what your CMDB should be able to tell you. And then finally, back to that last point is, and what skills do I have in those areas across my business? So who maintains those servers? Who maintains those business services? Who maintains or uses those business processes? And that completes my model of my CMDB. You then need to break down what you're trying to achieve into actionable goals. So you will have some drivers within your organisation that you're trying to do. So whether that's increasing self-service, increasing automation, maybe you're about to do a cloud migration, you want to understand your costs, break that down in terms of the outcome you're trying to achieve. So not the steps to populate the CMDB, that's not an outcome. Focus on why you're populating the CMDB. Why do you need that data? What are you using it for? As opposed to, let's just stick it all in there. Because there's no outcome to that. You need to think about it from the other way around. And then we break that down into 3 main areas. If you think about a CMDB, there's only really 3 things it's doing, right? You're either providing data to it, so where are we getting the information that we need? You're either maintaining it, so you're managing it to make sure it stays evergreen, or you are consuming it. So you're using it to either triage an issue, understand risk of change, understand the impact of your business. There's only 3 core principles really that you need to look at when you're building your CMDB out. You then want to focus on the end-to-end. So I have my provider, I maintain that data, but what is my consumer? Who's using this data? Who's going to benefit from the work that I'm putting in to build and set up my CMDB? Where are my outcomes? Where are my drivers? And then want to make sure you assign those tasks to the right resources to deliver within your teams. And then you want to leverage existing technology where possible. So obviously you're at the software and IT show, right? So there's a few people here that are probably looking at products that they want. But you may already have quite a lot of products already. So where you've got them, let's leverage them. Let's get them working for you now. Because actually the migration will be quite straightforward in many cases. The actual underpinning process of what you're trying to achieve is pretty tool agnostic, okay? It doesn't matter which tool you're using, you need to make sure you're using it to the best of its ability and you're driving an outcome from the data that you're putting inside it. So what are some example key drivers? So I might want to look at depth and breadth of my CMDB, so my structure, my classes, the attributes that I want, and you want to focus on things that are important to the business. So you see many CMDBs where they've got attributes down to nth level that are never used, or actually aren't consumed within the CMDB, they're consumed within the product that populate them. So for example, if I'm managing virtual servers, do I really want all the virtual server parameters in the CMDB? Probably not, because that's what VMware is for, or vSphere is for. What I do want to know is how many VMs I've got and what business services they provide and what happens when they go wrong and what happens to the risk of me changing them. I'm less concerned about the memory parameter on one of them. It's, you've got to make sure you get it to the right level for providing that outcome. And then what gaps do you have now? And then we look at how we can model your providers to close those gaps. In terms of impact and support analysis, have we got what we need to model change? That's an outcome driver. So do I really understand what happens when I change things in my organisation? That might be an outcome that I want to get to. Or how do we have better proactive management? So when an event comes in, how do I know what that's impacted, and can I stop that impact happening before it does? So for example, if I'm a retailer and I have busier periods in the year, I know that that's going to come up, the event comes in, and I automatically spin the server up before the issue comes about. And I can do that because I understand how I expand my virtualization in that example to give me more capacity. But it's looking at those areas, maybe that's what you're trying to achieve. Well, how do we just simply get from an event to a resolution more quickly? Maybe something as basic as that, the outcome that we want to try and do. Then we said, what does success look like? So maybe I've got an audit requirement and I need to get my change risk under control. That's a drivable outcome. So that's what I should focus on, the steps that get me to that. Or do I need more automation because I'm trying to go on a cost driver in my business? I want to improve my user experience. I want to start to bring in more automation. But to do that, I have to understand what steps I need to take to automate something. So maybe that's my driver. Or do I want to make better cost decisions? So maybe my CFO is completely badgering the CTO to say, you can't tell me how much IT costs. I've been told I need to save 10% this year. You need to tell me what everything costs by service, by service, by service. Maybe that's your driver. In which case you need to focus on how do I get there. So if we look at our consumer, maintainer, provider model, your providers are things like, it can be spreadsheet loads. It doesn't have to be some fancy discovery source. It's great if it is, but it might not be. You might not have that yet. So fine, we'll just put data in from spreadsheets. Data source loads, so your event tooling, your discovery tooling, your virtualization tooling, your cloud-based services such as AWS, Azure, they feed in, and your discovery tools. Then you have to maintain it. So you need a process for planning your CMDB, identification of those CIs that those providers have given you, control. So how do you make sure that stays up to date? So whether that's through a level of automation, through a level of feeding that data in every day, through reconciliation, normalization, those standards, but how do I get control over that data once it comes in? And for my logical CIs, like business services, how do I model those and make sure they're current? Do I put a process in place for a change completes, for example? Or do I look at a more automated method? Or maybe AI will come onto that to go and allocate all business services we've got within our business structure and mapping them back to our CMDB. And I need to make sure that I have an accountability over that data. So when the status changes or I have an impact to that, I make sure I understand that it's down or it's not available or we've got an outage or we're looking at an issue already or actually we're going to provision a new service. I need to make sure, how do I maintain that type of data? And finally, I will have a verification and an audit reason to manage that data. So there'll be regulatory requirements I have to make sure I adhere to. And the reason we're doing all of this is to make sure that our consumers get what they need. Because ultimately, that's the most important thing. We can build a brilliant CMDB, but if nobody knows about it, next time I go back and say, can I have another £200,000 to CMDB, they go, well, why? So you have to make sure that that conversation doesn't happen. So of course we've got CMDB. I know we've got one because that's what drives the service catalogue. So when I onboard a new member of staff, it's the CMDB that's driving that. And you go, that's perfect, that's exactly why. So can I have some more money to extend it? So you've got to make sure that it's that outcome-driven model because outside of IT, people are CDOs and CIs. Right? So you've got to breach that gap so the people at the top of the organisation truly understand why it's so important. So it might be around standard reporting, it might be around standard data extracts, it might be around processes to give that data what you want. There's nothing better than to prove the worth of a CMDB than, the CTO goes into the CFO and says, oh, you want to get those costs right about how much it's going to take to migrate the service from on-prem to the cloud and why we should do it? Well, here you go. This is your business service. This is everything that I need to support it. This is all the staff that run it. This is the cost now, this is the cost in the cloud. That's an outcome. That's really meaningful to the business and goes all the way up to the very top of the organisation. And that's how you can say that's an outcome-driven approach to building the CMDB. It's a reason why I would spend money to do it, because then I have some decision that I can take. So, let's go into a little bit more detail. We'll talk about mapping back what I've just said around the CMDB to the start of the presentation when I talked about the service catalogue. So it's important to expand and extend our service application maps so we match what the end users are doing and how they're describing it. So even to business process level. Why do I do this? Because if I have a full understanding of what's happening end to end, then I can either have targeted testing, I can give faster DevOps, I can have less risk or the opportunity for proactive problem management. So I'll give you an example there. We worked with a customer recently, they were doing some changes within their SAP module. Typically they had a 12-week testing cycle because they tested everything when they did a SAP release because it's critical to their business. That made sense. Actually what we said is, can't we break that down by understanding what business process is being consumed by that change? So let's look at what you're doing. Let's map that back to the business processes that your end users use. And if you're only changing that business process, well, let's focus the testing on that area. So we did some correlation in terms of their incidents and their changes and what they were making the change in DevOps. And what we decided was actually, you make this change to this business process 5 times a year, you have very few incidents, and actually when you do have an incident, it's usually around user education, because what you're doing is changing the report, and the end user can't find the report. So let's just focus on testing around that. So we reduce the testing cycle from 12 weeks down to 6. We're not bringing any more risk because we know we haven't had any more risk previously around that type of change. What you're doing there is you're using the business process level, layering on top of the people that consume it and use it, based on what issues you've had in the past, to make an informed decision about reducing that testing time. And the net result of that is faster, more agile DevOps, which is the reason you're doing it is to improve the user experience and reduce the cost across your business. So there's a real world reason to have a more accurate service application map and where it gives the benefit. If we look at an example in the consumer space, if I want to integrate something or I want to automate something, I have to understand why I'm doing it. So if I have a request for a new VM and someone comes in and says, I want a new server, I say, great, I'm going to automate that. You call the automation, spins the VM up, I get a message back saying your VM's ready. Now there's no reason why that process shouldn't take any more than 10-15 minutes. Today with cloud technologies, VMware, vSpin, it's instant spin VMs up. But in so many organisations it isn't. And that's because they don't have control over that environment structure. So they can't readily spin something up and have it update the CMDB and return that back to a developer. But it's about having a CMDB that's capable of doing that, because you understand the impact of spinning it up. You haven't got a complicated approval process, because you don't need it, and you've got control. Someone owns that VM once it's spun up, and therefore you have control across your business. So another good example of where my consumer of my CMDB is my developer in this case, who just wants a VM. Doesn't really care about the downstream service management process and the fact that it needs an event manager on it and it needs some control and we need to understand the cost. It just wants a VM. So the back-end process is spin up and set all of that up for him. But I can only do that based on the principles I've just gone through. Okay? So it's an example of where you have that opportunity for that type of request installation. So going back to some of those examples that I've just gone through there, what does the 12 weeks look like? So, very high level plan, but this is a typical example of, where we might look at this plan with a customer. So I've got 4 weeks spent doing an integration into Intune, because that's where my laptop and mobile estate is, and I want to get that data out, and I want to push that into my CMDB so I can control it and understand who's got what, maybe for my laptop refresh program, maybe for my security in terms of my mobile device management. But I'm going to do that because it's important to me, and my outcome is that I want to be able to handle my mobile estate. Because maybe I've got a gap at the moment, I've got a BYOD policy, it's not very secure, I want to get on top of that from a regulation standpoint, so that's my first focus. Alongside that, I'm going to make sure that my data quality is good, so I'm not duplicating CIs within my DB because I don't want to do that. I want to understand my true cost of those devices. I want to make sure that when my end user goes to the service catalog to request something, it already knows what he's got. So it knows that I've got an Android phone, and it knows that I'm running an HP laptop, it knows what they are, it knows what's on them, it knows the last time they were refreshed. So that improves my user experience, because it says, oh, Aaron, is this an issue with your Android device? Well, yes it is. Well, you do realise you're 4 weeks out of compliance. Oh, okay, fine, we're going to push down a patch. So it's about that type of targeted delivery, because I want to get that data quality correct. And that ties into my service map, so once my data quality is really good, and then I'm going to lay that service over the top. Because I now am confident that when Aaron logs in, I'm giving him the right information. So therefore I'm going to build out that service map, so now I can start giving that proactive experience to my end user. Underpinning that, I want to do a bit more request integration, because one of the things I want to do is, back to my first point, is drive adoption. So one of the big things in my business is access to different applications that I provide. So let's say I use SAP or Workday or Oracle, and there's some access controls that I have. So what I want to do is when someone requests access, subject to approval, I want it straight away. Don't want that to go to a human. I just want the integration done, and I want to get access immediately. That's going to be my trigger, make somebody go there and not ring up. So I'm going to build that into my 12-week plan, because that's going to get my adoption. It's going to make Aaron go and use my shiny new service maps that I've just produced, and it's going to give him a reason to go there and not call help desk. So I'm going to build that into my 12 weeks, because I need that, because that then leverages the work that I've just done within data quality, because there's no point doing that if no one goes to it. So that's my hook. And then I want to be able to tie my event sources in, so if an application is down, Aaron goes to his port when he tells him it's down, great, he doesn't need to log the ticket, he needs to subscribe to that notification, so when it comes back up, picks his mobile, oh cool, that's back up again, I'll go back in and do what I was going to do. So I don't have to call the help desk. It's a nice seamless process for me to use. Obviously I want to report that, because what I want to do is tell the people at the top of my business how great I am, right? So I built the CMDB, it's doing all of this. Look at all these processes now that are automated. Look how quickly our end users are getting that service, because I built in that automation and the data's accurate, and I've made it persona driven, so people don't have to go and hunt around for what they want, it's immediately there. So I'm going to build that dashboarding in so I can report on everything that I've just done. And underpinning that will be the vision for where we want to drive our CMDB to, and what we ultimately wanted to provide. And that's going to be a longer term thing than 12 weeks, when you want a deliverable within those first 3 months. In terms of structure, there's lots of different viewpoints of what a CMDB should be. The way that I break it down is by splitting it into 4 data dimensions. So you have logical CIs, so that's your service catalog, your services, your business processes, things that aren't tangible, but they're really important because it's the way people describe things. Then you have your physical CIs, the one that most people understand and the one that most organisations focus on first, because it's how much physical things have we got and what events run on them and how do we keep them up. It's the thing that people tend to focus on first. Then how are your users and your support teams mapped to those physical and logical CIs? So how do I fix them when they go wrong? This one is, it's always been important, but it's becoming more important. As we see ITSM transition from a traditional assigned group mechanism into a more tribe DevOps-based mechanism, this becomes really, really important. Because you cannot do that unless you have a true understanding and picture of who knows what, who supports what, where does it go. Because if you're going to remove assignment groups and just have tribes, then you can't run that model unless you truly understand where your skills are. So the CMDB becomes really important to move to that type of agile working, that type of DevOps model. It makes that even more important than it ever was. It always was important, because actually, if I don't understand who supports my physical and logical CIs, then my CMDB isn't really telling me the whole picture. So what do I do when a ticket comes in? How do I route it? How do I go and solve that problem quickly? I have to understand that area of my model. And then finally, we've got my cost modelling. So how much do these things cost? How much does it cost to provide that service? How much does it cost to provide that business process? And that's a really important element in the CMDB. Because being able to cost model allows me to change and transition and pivot. It means that if I'm going to swap out Google to Teams, how much is that going to save me? Or what's that going to cost me? Or what's my decision-making process around that? Or if I'm going to move from AWS to Azure, again, what am I swapping out? Where are my cost savings? What's my benefit? It's a really important aspect, and it's beginning to become more and more important to have that as part of my CMDB data structure. So within my logical CIs, how is my service catalog structured? Business services, technical services. You want that link to discovery, so I want to try and find my logical CIs myself. I don't really want to have service owners come in and map them because it's laborious. So I'll talk about some ways you can do that. I may have some manual capture, so there may be some things I can't find, so I'm going to go and ask the business to help me. I need to maintain and build my service maps, because as we discussed, it's important for my service catalogue. And we want to be able to link that back to things that are raised. So there's instances where some changes come in, we want to make sure they're assigned back to a service CI, because that's the way we're going to do our reporting, understand what's happening. And that allows us to then model our impact. And I don't just mean, when people see that term, they often think about change impact. It's not just about change impact. Impact modelling is about incidents as well. Because if I can model my incidents, I can then turn them into proactive problems, and then I can get rid of them. Because the best incident is one that doesn't exist, right? So what we're trying to achieve is no incidents, right? That's the goal, that's what we want. So as unrealistic as that may be, but that's what we're trying to get to, right? We don't want problems, we want them just fixed. We want to know that they're gone before they happen. So impact modelling is wider than change. People focus on change, but actually you tend to get a bigger response by looking at incident impact modelling, because you get many more incidents than you do changes, right? So it's an area to focus on. In terms of physical CIs, class structures, attributes, as I said, you want the right level of those. You don't want to go too far, because you only want what you need in the CMDB. Where you don't need it, you just signpost them to where they do go and get it. So you want to federate to the data sources that contain that data where you can. Reconciliation, pull everything together, make sure you have one example of each CI. Federation where you can to get the data that you don't need to store, and then a way of maintaining it. User support mapping. How do our support groups map back to those logical physical CIs? So how do we maintain and support them? Do we have the data for that? Do we know who supports them? Do we know where we've got gaps? Do we know if we bring a new service on what we need to do for that? Do we have the right data? Do we have outsourcers to manage? So maybe we don't actually own that data or support it, we use an outsourcer to do it. But then do we understand which outsourcer and what contract underpins that? How do we understand our underpinning SLAs? Do we understand what we need to do to escalate that within that outsourcer? It's all important information that really should be in our CMDB linked to that business service that I provide. Because then I can just go to it, find it straight away. I know my escalation point. I don't need to hunt around to say, okay, it's HCO, who do I contact there? My car's this person. You don't want that, you want it to be immediate. And how do we link that to approval? So if something comes in, we look at approval is needed based on what they're requesting, we store that centrally, that way if that approval changes, we can change it for the services that that approval is needed for. We don't just change it one by one by one by one by one. So we have a central place for that. And then how do we link that to our alerts and our use of personas? And then finally, in our cost modelling, how do we manage our supplier costs, our staff costs, our infrastructure costs, our penalties, our service levels? Do we have that data? And are we providing the right reports what our CFO and CTO need to run the business? Because ultimately, the CMDB should be telling us everything that our business runs on from an IT point of view. So therefore, it should be able to tell me how much it costs. It should be able to tell me what I need to do to run it, who maintains it, who supports it. So finally, we're going to look at how AI can do some of that heavy lifting. So there's three key things for continual service improvement. One is how I know what I want to prioritise my resources on. So what are my critical problems? Number two is I need to understand what is stable and what's an issue and join the dots between the two. And then finally I need to have something that's unbiased to show me what we think we know to what we actually know. Now, from a human perspective, we all have a very good idea of what we think is not quite working within our organisation, and what applications we have issues with, and where our instability lies. But we do that based on a cognitive understanding of our business. What we can't do is read 1 million help desk tickets and determine what the issue was and what they impacted, okay? Because nobody's got enough time to go and read all those tickets. And actually what we often do is rely on our end users and our service desk agents to categorise those tickets, so therefore we can report on them. Actually, in most cases, our end users don't know what they're actually reporting other than they can't do something, and our agents are only trained in a certain subset of our business. So we rely on two sources to provide what we think then happens in our business that actually don't have the most knowledge in terms of how we provide those services to our customers, okay? So where we can use AI is to read those tickets and do that for us. Because we can't read 1 million tickets, but it can. And what it can do is say, these were the issues you had, these were the CIs they impacted, and this was the impact. And these were the changes that ran at the same time that correlate back to those incidents. And these were the problems that you raised. And these are the patterns between them. Now what it can't do is make a decision then on how to make it right, or how to fix it, or how to necessarily interpret that data based on some business decisions that you've made, okay? AI is not that clever yet, it'll do that. That's where humans are really good at. We're really good at doing that, okay? Because we can make those decisions and we understand the business priorities. We understand why we made a decision not to invest X in our infrastructure, and that's why we're getting alerts, and that's why end users complain. But we need something that gives us those metrics, and that's where it's really good. It will do that, and it will highlight your gaps. And then you use those gaps to go back to the point of saying, right, let's plug those gaps, feed it back into our 12-week plan, and then have a deliverable outcome to close those gaps. And it can also help CI creation. So AI will find the heat maps based on our CIs, so it will understand what they are, it will understand what business processes people consume, because it's read all the tickets, so it understands how they've asked for it. We can then check to see if that exists within our gold data set. If it doesn't, we can get the AI to create it. We can then have some standardization to make sure it's not duplicating something that we've already got, and that completes our data flow. So we can use AI to do all of that for us. So it turns back to that point around controlling data and understanding how we want to start our CMDB build. Why don't I just go and let it do that? I'm not interested in building a load of CIs out of business processes and business services. I've got a whole ticket database that already has all of that. I just need somebody to go and read it. So I'll let it do it. Now I will refine it, and I'll use my human intelligence to make sure what I'm reporting on is correct, but I'm just going to go and let it do that heavy lifting for me, because it's going to give me that starting point. And that's why you can then turn a 6 to 12 month plan into a 3-month plan, because I'm not going to go and hunt for the data. I'm just going to let it give it to me, and then I'm going to formulate that into a plan. And ultimately, that gives you your action and your reaction. So something comes in, AI detects it, oh, we haven't got a match for that, go and tell the people that need to know, oh, okay, I understand there's a gap in our CMDB, let's plug it. Or, actually, I know what that is, and we've got a fix, and I can proactively solve it. So, I had the 5-minute warning. So, thank you very much for listening. If there are any questions, we've got probably about 3 minutes for questions.